Thank you very much. The 2019 provincial election was an important moment for Alberta. Albertans gave us marching orders to stand up for the province and fight to get a fair deal for Albertans in the Canadian Federation. Between 2015 and 2019, we saw the federal and provincial governments, in many cases, actively taking several actions that harmed Alberta's interests, including surrendering to President Obama's then veto of Keystone XL, scrapping the Northern Gateway pipeline, a pipeline to the Pacific which Premier Notley opposed, regulating the Energy East pipeline out of existence, giving the BC New Democrat government a blank check at the time to block and delay the Trans Mountain pipeline, while still Ottawa sent them hundreds of millions of dollars in discretionary transfers, giving Quebec a veto over New Brunswick's effort to revive the Energy East project, while giving Quebec $1.3 billion in increased equalization payments, pushing the tanker ban, Bill C-48, and the No More Pipelines Law, Bill C-69, through the House of Commons against objections from the majority of provinces and even the Canadian Senate, and extending the unfair equalization program by 5 years without giving Alberta a say. And so in 2019, Albertans decided they'd had enough, and they elected a new government, one that would not just fight on their behalf in Ottawa, but also to give them a voice, to let them put issues on the table that matter most to them, and to make sure their voices are heard far and wide. One of the biggest sources of frustration, at least in my conversations with Albertans, has been the fundamental unfairness of the equalization program. While the experts and pundits often mock the very idea of trying to change equalization, Albertans do not. Most Albertans I've spoken with about this issue say that they don't mind helping out their fellow Canadians. In fact, they're proud and have always been willing to share in a spirit of patriotism and generosity when times are good here and bad elsewhere. But when our generosity is met with hostility to our largest job-creating industry, and when the politicians who benefit from the hard work and resources of Alberta turn around and cut us off at the knees, blocking pipelines and imposing policies that damage our economy, well, that's where Albertans will draw the line. For millions of Albertans, equalization has become the most powerful symbol of the unfairness of Alberta's deal in Confederation, and for good reason. Under this flawed program, Albertans continue to send billions of dollars more every year to Ottawa than they get back in return, even when our economy is hurting and the economies of the recipients are booming. And that's why we are taking bold action to allow Albertans to be heard through a clear and simple referendum question. The clearest, most conclusive way to determine how the majority of Albertans feel about their current role within Confederation and this province's economic future is to ask them directly. And so, later today, I will introduce a motion in the legislature seeking approval for the following question to be put to a referendum this fall. Quotes, should Section 36(2) of the Constitution Act 1982, Parliament and the Government of Canada's commitment to the principle of making equalization payments, be removed from the Constitution, unquote. Not only is this delivering on a key election promise that we made to Albertans in 2019, it's one of the key recommendations of the Fair Deal panel. And I'm pleased we've panel members as MLAs Miranda Rosen and Tanya Yao from Banff Canmore and from Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo with us today. This is about giving Albertans a voice. It's about giving Albertans a seat at the table when it comes to the relationship between our province and a federal government that continues to take Alberta's contributions for granted. This is another promise made and another promise kept to the people of Alberta. Our Minister of Justice, Solicitor General, Kaycee Madu, will have more to say about this process, and I'll invite him to the podium now. When Kaycee's done, I'll have 3 points related to COVID, and then we'll take your questions.
Thank you, Premier. As the Premier explained, your government will be including a referendum question on the ballot for this fall's municipal election. The response to this question will provide clarity as to whether Albertans wish the principle of equalization payments to be removed from the Canadian Constitution. Albertans are now in the driver's seat. This is their chance to make their views known and to send a clear message to Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and the nation in general on the principle of equalization. But in order to reach that point, the Referendum Act sets out a process for us to follow. And the first step of that process is for a member of the Executive Council to make a motion in the legislature laying out the question that we propose to ask Albertans. If this motion passes, the Lieutenant Governor in Council may order the referendum. Clearly, a proposal that seeks to alter the Constitution is a serious matter. But this is something we promised Albertans in the last election. And this is something that was identified and recommended in the Fair Deal panel. Providing Albertans with more opportunities to express their democratic will outside of a provincial election is healthy for our democracy. So I am extremely excited that your government is empowering the public to have a say on this very important issue. And I am proud to be part of a government that puts Albertans in the driver's seat of their own democracy. Another promise made, another promise kept. I am looking forward to Albertans speaking with one loud voice on this unfairness within our confederation. With that, I will now invite my friend, the MLA from Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo, to make his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here today. During the Fair Deal consultations, Albertans told us that they wish seem to be treated fairly in federal government investments, as well as have nationwide support for our job-creating industries here in Alberta. Like when the federal government supports companies like SNC-Lavalin, Bombardier, and Air Canada, but it hasn't been the case here. As the Premier mentioned, when the federal government introduces legislation that specifically impedes Alberta-based industries, it sends a very clear message to Albertans that there is no support for Alberta. Legislation like C-48, which landlocks Canada's hydrocarbon sector while still allowing these same products to come from nations from the Middle East that do not follow our ethical and social governance, is extremely hypocritical and impairs Canada's prosperity. Bill C-69, which denigrates our hydrocarbon industry and impedes the development of critical infrastructure like Energy East, hurts Canadian energy independence. This critical infrastructure would support Canadian energy sovereignty instead of being reliant on nations like the United States and Line 5 for energy. As the MLA for Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo, my community knows that her industries support Canadians. Alberta averages almost $20 billion annually in net contributions to Confederation. Almost 10,000 Canadians commute from across Canada to work in the Fort McMurray region alone. Even in aspects like the Canadian Pension Plan, Albertans contribute disproportionately by about $3 billion annually more than we receive in pension funds. Yet despite all these large contributions by Albertans, there is no investment in Alberta. And I'm not just speaking about the disproportionate funding the federal government gives for infrastructure, specific sector development, and other federal handouts. An example investment would be the management of our national parks. Parks Canada, with about 85% of national park land area being in Western Canada, is headquartered thousands of kilometers away. With a budget of over $1.5 billion and over 5,500 employees, it's located in Gatineau, Quebec. Because Albertans see regional favoritism being played by this federal government, it has forced Albertans to consider if the current arrangement within Confederation is fair. Based on fiscal contributions, federal government investment, and legislation, Alberta certainly doesn't appear to be getting treated fairly, and I'm very happy that our government is listening to those that spoke at our Fair Deal consultations. This also follows through with one of our election commitments. Thank you so much, and it is now my honor to introduce Miranda Rosen, the MLA for Banff-Kananaskis.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having me here today. For many Albertans, equalization is the epitome of all that is unfair in our Dominion. As vaguely defined in Section 36(2) of our Canadian Constitution, equalization was initially intended to ensure that all provinces had sufficient revenues to provide reasonably comparable levels of public services at reasonably comparable levels of taxation. But in our current reality, this program has slowly expanded to fund much more than basic levels of public service in our country. During the 5-year period of 2014 to 2019, Alberta sent over $100 billion in equalization transfer payments to other provinces, more than $23,000 per Albertan. And over the past decade, we've sent more than $57,000 per Albertan, more than many people's annual salaries. Before equalization payments are made, thanks to the hardworking spirit of Albertans, our province has some of the highest revenues per capita in the entire country. Yet after equalization payments are made, Alberta is left with the second lowest revenues per capita in the entire country. Through a complex formula that calculates which provinces receive and which provinces transfer payments, equalization rewards irresponsible anti-economic development policies while punishing responsible economic development governance. Equalization encourages socialist practices while discouraging self-determination by requiring privately developed national resources to count against the transfer formula while exempting nationalized national resources in Quebec. And through the slippery deterioration of equalization's constitutional intent, it is not only no longer equalizing, but it is actually disproportionately making Alberta poorer. At the same time Alberta is struggling financially, Quebec runs a $30 million budgetary surplus on money that isn't theirs. My colleague, Mr. Yao, and I had the honor of traveling the province for 5 months as members of Alberta's Fair Deal panel. And boy, did people give us an earful at town halls when it came to equalization. So today, I'd like to quote a few. From Edmonton, Canada is flawed. Alberta is institutionally disenfranchised by our country's own constitution and treated as a colony. Fairness will never be achieved until we stop being forced to give away our money. From Red Deer, provinces that choose not to harvest their natural resources and grow their economies are not have-nots, they're will-nots, because they know they don't have to pay their bills. From Calgary, with an equalization referendum, maybe we will finally get the red carpet for resource exports, rather than red tape from this federal government. From Grand Prairie, we worked really hard for our money up here, but people are still really struggling. This government has a moral imperative to call an equalization referendum. From Lloydminster, I've always loved my country, but I just can't understand why it is so prejudiced against us. And from Airdrie, any other fair deal initiatives that your government undertakes will be worthless without a foundation of equalization reform. All in all, our Fair Deal panel heard an overwhelmingly negative response to equalization from every corner of the province. We hosted 25 town halls at which we met and heard from nearly 5,000 people. 94% of those who spoke to the issue of equalization at these town halls voiced support for a referendum on equalization, and most of them nearly demanded it. Our panel also received over 40,000 responses to our online survey, 1,000 responses to our telephone survey, and thousands more emails, comment cards, and handwritten notes. 70% of those responding to the online survey and 79% of those who responded to the telephone survey also wanted to see the equalization formula at minimum amended. And so for these seemingly obvious reasons, our panel recommended the government proceed with the equalization referendum. So today, I am very excited to stand here alongside my former panelists, Mr. Yao, and our Premier and our Minister of Justice and Solicitor General to announce that the referendum is officially coming to Alberta in 4 short months. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily Rosen. We will now go to the phones for questions. 2 questions each. Oh, pardon me. Premier's just going to add a few more remarks here.
Thank you. And we'll get to questions in just a minute. A couple of COVID-related points I wanted to make first. I've been asked recently, a number of our members of the legislature have also been asked by business operators if we are proceeding with moving to phase 2 of the Open for Summer plan, which we have scheduled for June 10th, and they're looking for certainty. So I want to be very clear about this. We had confirmed in a news release last week that we are moving to phase 2 of the Open for Business plan this upcoming June the 10th. It was predicated on us achieving 60% of the eligible population having received a first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine with a 2-week lag, and we are now well past that. We're now at, by the end of today, probably 67%. And we also had as a metric 500 COVID hospitalizations and declining. And as of last night, we were at 351 and declining. The numbers continue to go very much in the right direction. In fact, I believe we'll be reporting later this afternoon that we recorded 163 new COVID cases yesterday, which is the lowest number, I believe, since early October, so for about 9 months. And with less than 5,000 active cases, at 4,700 active cases. Over the weekend, we went below 100 COVID patients in intensive care. And I just want to say thank you to Albertans for making this possible. Thank you for your diligence, and thank you for getting signed up to get the vaccines. On that point, we are seeing diminishing demand for the first dose of the vaccines. We have only 100,000 bookings over the next 7 days. And for us to reach the 70% threshold that will trigger our full open for summer plan 2 weeks after, we need about 115,000 more people to get their first dose of vaccine. So we're getting to that critical point right now where every additional person who decides to get the first dose is going to be able to accelerate the full openness of Alberta. So if you've been holding back for one reason or another, now is the time over the next week to get the jab so that we can move forward more quickly with the full open for summer plan. Another point I wanted to raise, I did some consultations over the weekend, and I had business owners asking if this was just an open for summer plan or if it is also going to go into the fall. They were concerned that everything would be, that public health restrictions will be reimposed in the fall. And I'm sorry if the open for summer idea gave people that impression. But so let me be very clear. Now, this is our plan to be open for good. Obviously, the virus will continue to circulate, but the vaccines are increasingly demonstrating that they defeat the virus. And by the time we get to the fall, we can expect, as is always the case with a contagious disease of this nature, that there will be a fall spike based on weather, seasonality, and other factors. But and there will be new variants, and they'll come and go. But the key thing is just growing that protection of our population through the vaccines, and we are very confident that by the time we get into the fall, by the time we get into late September, for example, that we will be approaching 80% both first and second dose coverage in our population, and we'll be able to maintain that freedom. Like with any contagious disease, we've got to keep our eye on it. But folks, this is not just for the summer. This is the open for business, open for good plan. Now, I do want to address something that has been a real controversy and growing in recent days, and that was the fact that last Tuesday night I hosted a working dinner for staff and a few colleagues in the Premier's office here in Edmonton on the deck outside my office. For the past 16 months, I have tried hard to observe the public health rules. I thought it's important for me to lead by example, but I have to admit I haven't always done that perfectly. I can think of many cases where I've been within 2 meters of people, and that I'm sure has been the case for the past 16 months for pretty much everybody in Alberta, the vast majority of whom have tried to follow these rules, but sometimes may have found themselves within 2 meters of others. Last Tuesday, I had a planning meeting scheduled with colleagues and staff, and because it was going to be a lengthy evening meeting, I asked that we bring in some takeout to do it over dinner. And because we had just opened that day in phase 1 to outdoor gatherings of up to 10 people, I thought it was actually prudent and better to do that meeting outdoors on a deck. We took precautions to do it in a distanced way, trying to observe the rules. In fact, we set up 4 contiguous tables and spaced chairs out. We've actually gone up and measured the chairs since this became a controversy, and apparently 4 of us were 2 meters or more between each other, but two of those chairs were less than 2 meters distance, and there's no doubt that over the course of the evening, people came within the 2 meter distance that is laid out in the public health guidelines. And I regret that. I regret that the perception this has created. Quite frankly, When somebody said, "Are you sure you should be doing this? This is in public view," my response was, "Yes, we're allowed to follow the rules." And I thought, if anything, it's a positive thing to show the openness at phase 1 of the Open for Summer plan with the social gatherings of up to 10 people. I certainly thought it was better that we meet outdoors than indoors. We've pretty much suspended most indoor meetings over the past 3 months since we got into the spring spike, but we have begun in recent days, in the last couple of weeks since the legislature come back, to have small in-person gatherings for longer meetings. And again, I thought it was prudent and compliant with the rules to do this outside. But it's clear that at some points in that evening, we were not all distanced from one another by 2 meters. And I truly regret that. I take full responsibility for this. I invited my colleagues there. I was of the clear view that we were complying with the Open for Summer rules, but it is clear that some of us were not distanced the whole night, and I have to take responsibility for that. We have to set a higher example, a higher threshold of conduct, and so I want sincerely to apologize to my colleagues and to Albertans for letting you down, for not being more careful to scrupulously follow every aspect of the public health guidelines that we expect of everyone. And so I sincerely regret that the decision that we made. We should have taken extra precautions to be distanced, and I just won't be doing any social gatherings until we get into phase 3, just to avoid any possible mistakes or misunderstandings. So I sincerely apologize again. I take full responsibility, and I hope to learn from this, as I say, in ensuring that we not be put in a position of violating the distance guidelines and the other important public health measures which remain in place until we get to phase 3. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Perfect. We'll now go to the phones for questions. 2 questions each, either 1 question, 1 follow-up, or 2 off the top. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
James Keller, Globe and Mail.
Hi, Premier. Your initial reaction to this outdoor dinner was to insist you didn't do anything wrong. Members of your staff were mocking people online for suggesting otherwise. And you handled the issue of the international travel at Christmas essentially in the same way. So how do you expect Albertans to believe that this apology, or really any other apology that follows this playbook, is actually sincere?
Well, I'll just restate what the point I've made, which is that I knew we were doing this outdoor gathering in full public view, in the understanding that we were complying with the rules, and particularly given the 10-person outdoor gathering rule that which we brought into effect on Tuesday morning. And I've been encouraging Albertans to move things outdoors. I honestly believed it was better to meet outdoors than indoors. I've held many meetings on that deck over the course of the past 16 months. And none of those had been controversial. We always try to do that in a socially distanced way. And so, but I've heard people clearly. I've heard from caucus colleagues and others. And we've gone back and reviewed this and realized that not everybody was maintained the 2-meter distance throughout. And recognizing that, I'm apologizing for that fact. In terms of, the fact of the matter is that people are permitted to do social outdoor gatherings of up to 10. The rules ask that they maintain that distance. We should have been more careful to do so, and I apologize that we didn't.
Do you have a follow-up, James?
Yeah, you didn't apologize. So your culture minister asked you to also apologize for your comments about cancel culture, just given the news last week. Can you explain what circumstances you'd be fine with renaming buildings and the like? I'm thinking of the Grandin LRT station in Edmonton, or renaming the Langevin School in Calgary. Is that cancel culture? How far does that go?
Well, I'm just going to refer back to the answer I gave to a question last Thursday, I believe, as well as I took some questions on this on the Roy Green show on CMHL and the Chorus Radio Network yesterday afternoon. I think I've spoken to that extensively. I have also spoken extensively to, including in my speech a week ago today in the legislature, on the terrible tragedy and the wickedness of the Indian residential school system. of the unmarked graves that were found recently in Kamloops, of those children, their families, and all of the hundreds of thousands of others who they have come to represent. This is, I believe, the darkest mark in all of Canadian history, and it lasted for the better part of a century under multiple governments. It was a policy implemented by, with a widespread political consensus, a multi-partisan consensus involving civil society, the churches, and local communities. Just as provincial governments were involved in the 60s scoop, which was kind of an echo of the Indian residential school system. All of that is a deeply tragic history from which we must learn, which we must embed in our history education and in our collective memory. And it also impels us to redouble our efforts at reconciliation. So those are, we've all been prompted, I think, to a renewed commitment to that in light of the tragic discovery of these unmarked graves last week. And at the same time, my remarks about trying to kind of efface from our history many of the central figures in building Canada, I think are continue to be true, and those comments were actually echoed by a Liberal Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller last week. So I would say that the recognition of the terrible evil of the Indian residential schools, the formal Government of Canada apology, the compensation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and all of the other work that is underway must continue. But that should not lead us to efface most of our history. And I'll just refer back to the comments I've made about that in the past.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Bill Fortier, CTV.
Hi, Premier. You admit that distancing rules were broken non-intentionally, and I'm curious how you can expect Albertans to understand, remember, and follow the rules as you've asked them multiple times if the Premier and the Health Minister apparently can't.
Well, actually, he and I were seated more than 2 meters apart, but a couple of the 6 seats were closer than that. What we've always asked is that people do their best. I don't think anybody's walked around for the past 16 months with a 2-meter yardstick. I find myself in lots of circumstances where I am at gatherings and find myself less than 2 meters from people. I was just in front of one of your TV cameras on Saturday at the vaccine clinic in Northeast Calgary, where a number of the wonderful local volunteers doing brilliant work came to chat and explain to me what they were doing, and I'm pretty sure we were within 2 meters of one another. Often that gets me into what I call the COVID two-step, where I kind of back up and people naturally come within a discussion distance. That I can think that's happened for me dozens of times over the past 16 months. So we've never asked people to walk around with the 2-meter rule stick. We've asked people to exercise good judgment and discretion. We tried to distance out. There were 4 tables there, 6 people spread around. But we should have done better. That's clear. In retrospect, we should have made it impossible for us to be within 2 meters of one another, and I regret that we didn't take that extra precaution.
Do you have a follow-up, Bill?
Yeah, just a quick one, and forgive me if I misheard this. I thought I heard you say that this dinner, as you called it, last week, did you say it was a meeting, that the decision was made to take a meeting outside? And if so, what appeared to be a bottle of whiskey was on the table. So if it was a meeting, I'm wondering if it's customary and normal to have a bottle of whiskey at a meeting.
Somebody gave me one for my 30th birthday. It was scheduled as a business meeting. I decided to take it outside, and in fact, I did so because I thought this could be seen as a social function. We have a total ban on indoor social functions. It was a gathering to discuss government business. That's what we did for 3.5 hours or more on a range of important public issues. I thought it was in an excess of caution best to do that outdoors, where the chances of transmission are radically lower than indoors. Again, that's why we ask people, if they're going to socialize or get together, to do so outside. It's why I've also held meetings on that deck before many times over the past 16 months.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Dean Bennett, Canadian Press.
Hi, Premier. So I'm trying to understand what happened last week. You were pretty careful in what you said. This was not a breach. We saw a picture. Clearly, you're breaking the 2-meter distance, and you're telling Albertans no. What you see in this picture is not what it actually is. Believe me, there is no health violations here. And then when you were asked in the House about it on Thursday, you were very careful to give half an answer. No, we were within the 10-person limit. You never addressed the masks. You never addressed the distancing. It was half an answer. And now you're telling us today, we've done a research, we measured chairs, and now we realize that we weren't within distancing. Premier, I put it to you, sir, that you knew this last week. You saw the picture. You knew that you had broken the rules, but you did it anyway. But you decided for whatever reason that you're going to tell people what they see is not what they see. It was gaslighting, Premier. You did it, and now you're going to apologize today, not because it's wrong, but because you're facing a mini revolt in your cabinet and caucus. Is that true, sir?
Well, Dean, first of all, there is no mask mandate for outdoors whatsoever. There never has been in Alberta. Secondly, the reason we decided to do this was outdoors was because just that day we had permitted 10 people to gather outdoors, and we did try to socially distance with 4 contiguous tables. We measured the diameter around them at 38 feet. A couple of the seats were less than 2 meters apart. And there's no doubt as people moved around in the course of the evening and violated the 2 meters of distancing. So I've reflected on that. I can tell you that none of we fully knew we were in public view there. Again, when somebody said, "Are you sure we should be gathering outdoors?" I said, "Well, it's a lot better than indoors. It's permitted by the rules. We're allowed to follow the rules. We tried to socially distance out there. We didn't do a good enough job of it, and I truly regret that because we should be held to a higher standard, and that falls on me."
And do you have a brief follow-up, Dean?
Yeah, Premier, I don't like to call you out. But I think it's a question that deserves to be asked. It looks to me, in the totality of it, you knew last week you had broken the rules. You decided to gaslight the very people you represent. And that matters because if you'll gaslight us on this, what else will you gaslight us on? So why did you gaslight us last week when you said that you did not break any health rules?
So, Dean, I was, again, we were following the rule for 10 people outdoor gatherings. We had made efforts to socially distance. If we hadn't done that, we could have just gathered around one of these 4 tables. We set up 4 contiguous tables, made a purposeful effort to distance them out, and believed we were in compliance with the rules. We've taken a closer look at this. We've heard from people, and that's why I acknowledge that the social distancing rule was not perfectly followed throughout the evening, and that is for which I accept responsibility and for which I apologize, because we are expected to be at a higher standard. I will say this, Dean, you can go back and I'm sure find lots of pictures, I'm sure people are already looking, over the past 16 months and find me at lots of different events where I am within 2 meters of other people. And so I think that is one rule where I and other Albertans have generally tried to be conscious of it and follow it, but probably haven't done it perfectly for the last 16 months. And so I don't want everybody in Alberta to get out there and think that they're in gross violation of the rules if at some point they were 1.5 meters away from somebody at an outdoor function, for example. But we should be kept to a higher standard. I recognize that, I'm acknowledging that, and I'm apologizing for the fact that we didn't meet that standard last Tuesday.
All right, and looks like we have time for one more question. Operator, can you please put through our last caller?
Audrey Neveu, Radio Canada.
Hi, Premier. Thank you for taking my question. I have a question for you on equalization, if you can answer in French and in English, please. On the motion, if the referendum goes ahead and your government is binded by that, but on what steps exactly? What is it? Does it have to do?
I'm sorry, could you just clarify? You were asking what do we have to do to make it the referendum happen?
No, if the referendum goes ahead and the results come back that Albertans want you to remove that section from the Constitution on equalization, it says that your government it's a binding referendum, but what are you bound to exactly?
Sure.
What steps would you have to do afterwards?
And you'd like that in English and French, right, Audrey?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So first in English, if a majority of Albertans endorse this proposed constitutional amendment, we would then pass a motion through Alberta's legislature to ratify a proposed constitutional amendment. We would then send that to the Government of Canada and ask for their ratification. I don't expect that to be forthcoming. We would then ask for at least negotiations over the question of equalization in the Constitution. Our judgment is that based on the Quebec secession reference of the Supreme Court of Canada from 1998, that the Government of Canada, a positive vote on a proposed constitutional amendment, if it has a clear question and a clear majority of Albertans vote in favor of it, that those meet the threshold of the Quebec secession reference to compel the Government of Canada to engage in good faith negotiations with Alberta about the proposed constitutional amendment. So essentially, it would lead to legislative ratification of the decision of Albertans seeking that constitutional amendment. That would then trigger negotiations with the Government of Canada. I want to be clear, as I have been from day one on this matter, that we should not expect that a yes vote is immediately going to fundamentally change equalization. We don't have the power unilaterally to do that as a province. But this is a strategy to elevate Alberta's fight for fairness in the Federation to the top of the national agenda, to get Ottawa's attention and to send a message to our friends in the rest of the country that we expect to be treated fairly. We will no longer accept governments erecting barriers, for example, to pipelines, while taking ever-growing equalization transfers from Alberta resources that they're trying to block. So this is a legal tool to make a very strong political point in the strongest way possible to assert our fight for fairness in the Fédération. I'll say that more briefly in French. Si une majorité des Albertains appuie le référendum pour modifier la Constitution en ce qui concerne la péréquation, la législature va endorser cette idée avec une motion qui propose une modification de la Constitution à cet égard, et ça va forcer le gouvernement fédéral, d'après nous, d'ouvrir les pourparlers avec l'Alberta sur la question de péréquation. Ça, c'est effectivement le principe articulé par la Cour suprême du Canada en 1998 dans la référence sur la sécession du Québec, où la Cour suprême a dit que si une claire majorité des électeurs dans une province votent en faveur d'une modification proposée de la Constitution avec une question claire, que le fédéral a une obligation légale de négocier cette question en bonne foi avec la province. Si ça, c'est le principe pour le Québec, ça doit être également le principe pour l'Alberta. Nous savons bien que ça ne changera pas la péréquation tout de suite parce que nous n'avons pas le pouvoir de le faire unilatéralement. Mais ça va élever jusqu'au sommet les demandes essentielles de l'Alberta pour une position plus juste dans la Fédération.
And do you have a brief follow-up, Audrey?
Yes, I do. Switching gears, though, regarding your controversial dinner for which you apologized last week, your former UCP leadership opponent, Brian Jean, is calling on your resignation. he says that you have lost the trust of Albertans and that it could cost the UCP the next election if you stay on as leader. So I want to know what's your reaction. What do you think Brian Dean's endgame is here?
He's been saying that for the better part of 2 years, so that's not really news. C'est pas exactement des nouvelles, et les mêmes choses qu'il a dit depuis il a perdu le leadership.
Excellent. That's all our time for today. Thanks
very
joining
much,
us.
everyone.